welcome to
Thank
Disrupting
you so
Doctors'
much.
Careers. It is a pleasure to have you on this podcast. And we invited Catherine really because, I mean, I met Catherine maybe about 6-7 months ago, but had seen some of what she was doing online anyway. And the great thing about her is not only being a wonderful person and a GP, but also she has positioned herself extremely well as a clinical content expert. And there aren't that many of them about. There probably will be after this podcast episode. But basically, I wanted the opportunity to have a chat with Catherine to really understand more about how she developed her career as a portfolio GP and how she's done it in industry using some of her passions and interests and doing remarkably well, currently working in a startup, Dermatica. She's going to tell us a bit more about that. But thank you so much for joining us and welcome.
I'm super excited to be here. As I mentioned to you when you asked, I kind of couldn't stop myself jumping up with excitement because I've always wanted to be on a podcast. So, I know.
Yeah, you said music to your ears and I'm like,
woohoo!
Well, let's start singing and talking about portfolio careers. So, I mean, obviously GP is a really great foundation to develop a portfolio career. We all know that. When you went into GP, were you thinking this is because I want to do a portfolio career, or is it something that you kind of naturally kind of segued into? How did that come about?
Because I think it's something I have long suspected that full-time clinical medicine wasn't going to be a fit for me, and actually the virtue of GP is you can lean in more easily, I would say, to a portfolio career within the current structures. Thankfully, that's changing for lots of hospital careers too, but it's more of a done thing in GP land. But actually, it also became almost as a sense of sustainability that actually, as I was doing GP more full-time, it just became apparent to me that it was unsustainable for me to be a full-time GP. So a portfolio career was developed out of passion, but a little bit out of necessity as well, because I was just thinking, blimey, being a full-time GP is super hard. It's not necessarily aligning with all my passions, and I need to work out a way to change this.
Mm-hmm. Okay, fantastic. And I mean, I don't come across that many full-time GPs anymore. Maybe because a lot of them have burnt out and realised that actually working less is a bit more sustainable and looking for to do other things. So how did you decide what that other thing was for you? What was that
actually, just
process
circling
like?
back to the first comment you make, it says a lot, doesn't it, that there aren't many full-time GPs. And I suspect you're absolutely right that burnout is playing a huge element in that just not being a possibility. But in terms of working out, I guess, what my other thing was, it was really tricky because actually when I was working full-time, you're almost too exhausted to actually work out what you're passionate about. And I remember feeling like a bit of a scattergun because I was like, okay, anything at the moment is better than being a GP full-time for me. So what can I do? And I think the maybe more obvious paths present themselves to you. So in anyone training to be a GP or as a GP already know there are lots of diplomas available. So I was looking at those as a possibility, thinking about more practical GP, but traditional GP work. So, for example, coil fitting. But none of those really got me super excited. And so I kept having a think and trying to get a sense of people whose careers I appreciated and got excited by looking at. And someone I met along the way was called Dr. Rena Katecha, who works for a company called Mindful Medics. And I reached out to her and just said, oh, hey, can I work with you? And actually she gave me my first bit of content work, which was writing for the course materials for a mindfulness for surgeons course. And as I was writing,
I can't
jump in.
Yeah, I love to jump in. So tell me more about how you came across Rena and how the conversation led to writing. Was writing something that you were thinking, hey, that's something I want to do, or is it just an opportunity that came up in the sense that you worked with someone that you felt aligned
it's a really
with
good
in what they
question.
would do?
So in terms of how I came across Arena, is actually through Practitioners Health Programme, which is a great UK-led service. And they were running a course on mindfulness for medics. And I was thinking, okay, well, I definitely need a dose of mindfulness in my life. So I actually did Rena's course. And she was really focusing on helping prevent burnout within medics as a whole, but also doing highly specialized work, knowing that actually being in the clinical world is very different to being in other professions, and as such the support structures needed for it vary as well. So when I reached out to her, it was actually more of a general, gosh, I think what you're doing is really cool. I really respect your mission, and I can absolutely see the need for why your business exists. And actually it was her who suggested writing up the course materials as the first thing. So it was quite serendipitous. I've always enjoyed writing and I love reading, but I had never really translated how I could do that as a medic. And once I got that first bit of writing with Rena, I suddenly thought, hey, this is something I could do more of. And things kind of went on from there.
Mm-hmm. And how long ago was that, Catherine?
It was mid-pandemic when I was at the end of my tether with GP. So I would say that was about 2020, after the first lockdown.
Okay, so I mean, like under 3 years ago, so really not that long in the grand scheme of things. And so when you realised there was a way, an entry point for you to really develop yourself outside of clinical practice, what were your next steps, and how did that come about?
My next steps were a bit of floundering and thinking, how on earth do I do this? So I actually signed up with my local deanery, and they were doing careers coaching. And I found that super helpful and clarifying, because I, again, was trying to work out how to make a plan of action. And actually that really helped me work out the things I did and didn't enjoy doing. And then I actually started reaching out in quite a random way to like people I like, just saying, hey, can I work with you again? So I thought, okay, I've worked with Rena, let me try again. And actually I reached out to Red magazine, which is a women's magazine in the UK. And I managed to get some work writing for their digital edition as a women's, just about GP. So we did a series on menopause, and which gained quite a lot of traction as well. So that developed my confidence in writing and almost putting myself forward as a writer and a doctor as well.
Okay, jumping in again, I think that's really fantastic that you had the courage to reach out to this particular magazine. And what did reaching out actually look like? Because we hear that term being used quite a lot. But one of the struggles that doctors face is like, what did you actually have to do? A, to get someone to respond. You might have been lucky and get a response first time, or maybe not. And B, to actually convince them that you doing something for them would be in their own benefit.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I'd love to hear a bit more about that.
I think I got really lucky with my experience with Red, because I reached out at a time where the digital editor was just changing and they needed someone straight away. So that was just a luck and timing thing. And I initially...
But did you just email someone? Like when you reached out,
initially I emailed the editor of the whole magazine, and I got radio silence, as one would expect. So then I just looked up online emails for Red magazine and sent the same email multiple times. So I would say it wasn't very highbrow. It was just like, I'm just going to keep emailing.
See, that is so that information is so important. I love the way we've gone from you just reached out and the job was yours to actually, I had to do a lot of research. I had to look a lot of emails.
Abeyna, it makes you sound so much better if I say I just reached out.
I know, but it's more like I really want to highlight the amount of grafting it really takes in people's narratives and storytelling that gets glossed over, just to put it into perspective for others. Because when you're like doing the same thing, if I come and follow you and say, oh, I can just reach out to a magazine and they're just going to give me a job and an opportunity, it's like, well, actually reality is that that's not really how it happens, and you do a lot of work to actually get their attention in the first place. And like what we actually also haven't talked about is what did you put in the emails, as in how did you position it so that actually got a response? Like how did you end up sending in the end? Just again, these numbers are again really valuable insights for doctors who are going to be doing the same thing, whether it's like content, whether it's jobs, anything. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting because say when I reached out to Rena, who was someone I knew I'd connected with personally before, actually the nature of the email was very different, because you have that instant connection, and actually that is a very different interaction, and actually I would love to dig out the emails I sent to Red, because now I probably cringe at how I was pitching myself, because you're not taught any of this useful life stuff in med school, but I essentially I think my enthusiasm came across. So I just said, I love your magazine, this is what I could offer you, do you have any work? And it actually wasn't too long. I didn't attach a CV or anything, because at that point all I had was clinical work, which doesn't mean much outside of the medical world for someone reading that CV. So I suspect that my email dropped into the inbox at the right time once I got the right email to send it to. But I think also that people respond really well if your enthusiasm comes through, and I don't know, I think there's a sense of like people can come across quite sterile in emails, or like there's a bit of, I don't know, playing lip service to a company, but I think it comes across when you are actually excited by an idea, and I always lean into that enthusiasm and would rather come across as a overexcitable puppy than someone who's kind of a bit apathetic and playing it cool.
Overexcitable puppy. So funny. So was it literally the one email, as in, I know you sent a number of emails to different people, but did you have to do any follow-ups, or was it literally one of those people just answered
in that case,
straight away?
With the magazine case, I got the answer, and actually I got a brief pretty much straight away. I think it's really helpful to say, and for complete transparency, I wasn't paid for my work with Red, and I think that is it's a helpful talking point. I think that actually it's, do you work for free? And it's something that I've gone back and forth on thinking about. It's now I don't work for free, but I think there is a debate when you're trying to get into something about the virtue of working for free, how long you should do it, what your parameters should be, and I think that should be something that people consider, because if companies are able to have you for free, they will have you for free. So it's also that sense of knowing your worth and knowing when to stop as well.
I think that's an extremely pertinent discussion point, and I'm really glad that you raised it, because like what we're talking about is working from, well, there's free and there's money, because obviously you can work for a variety of different reasons that doesn't involve money. That's what we're talking about here. So for you, working for them helped you in the sense of gaining greater experience in industry, writing for a magazine, like a well-known magazine, and I guess network as well, relationships, that kind of thing. And so for that was of significant value to you, and you've obviously made a decision as to how long you would do that, and you that was, I assume it was a lot of conscious decision making there. And let's looking at, because there's always this big debate as to whether to get into industry, to get your foot in the door, do you work for free? My philosophy is, especially as a doctor, you don't have to work for free. It's not something that you necessarily, I don't think doctors should be in the mindset that in order to get ahead, they have to do it for free to start off with. That's 100% not the case at all. They also don't have to do it at below market rate or either. It doesn't have to be the case at all. But it's really important that doctors make a conscious, like, weighing up the risks and benefits of not having that remuneration in the form of money, but is there any other value that they're getting from it that's probably the equivalent of what they would probably get if they were paid? Because everyone's got a different situation, right? And some people may feel actually this is way more valuable than if I was actually paid X, Y, and Z for it. I'd rather do it for that experience rather than necessarily take the pay at this time and then obviously reevaluate the situation because things change. But it's really important that you have that conversation with yourself and you evaluate it in that way. Because there's other things that you can get in exchange, other than money. I was reading a book on the Usborne beginner's book for, there's money, philosophy, economics, and actually economics in particular, it's mainly about looking at not just cash. You can also barter other things, as we have done since the beginning of time. But it's about the value at the end of the day that you are getting and that the company is getting, and making sure you're both comfortable with that arrangement.
100%.
It's an arrangement.
And I think exposure can be quite an intoxicating thing, and what can be used to hook people in. So like you said, it's just having that sense of where your boundaries are. What are you gaining? What currency are you gaining? And actually that currency for you at that point of your career may be exposure. But at what point do you need to pay your mortgage and turn on your heating again?
Exactly. I mean, we know that most doctors at the moment are working for free in the NHS. And the NHS, I'm sad to say it, does run on a lot of altruism, not just from doctors, but from other healthcare workers. And as we know, as we speak right now, junior doctors are planning to strike again and overpay. And I'm not going to go into this because I literally go off into another rant, which I'm not going to do. But yeah, it's another podcast we should definitely do, another podcast episode we should definitely do. Anyway, moving back to you. And so, I mean, I think it's fantastic what you've done, especially having the courage to actually reach out and what that involved to get the experience and really kind of pad out your portfolio as a content writer. So at what point did you then start positioning yourself as a clinical content writer and then using that to jump into other areas and avenues, particularly in health tech?
So I think at that time of my career, I had just moved over to Babylon, which is a obviously super well-known company and in the health tech space as well. So I think that was a really actually awesome time in my career to suddenly realize how many other opportunities were out there. And I think when you are, I was on a very prescriptive path, so to speak. I had done my foundation years, I'd done my GP training, I'd gone straight into a salaried role, and you almost don't realize all the opportunities that exist. And actually working in a new company in a new way was a really exciting time to start looking at other possibilities. And actually, whilst I was there, Claudia Pastides was working there as their medical content manager, I believe was her title at the time, but we will check her LinkedIn to review that. And she was doing lots of really cool content about, on YouTube, on social media, and also blogs as well. And I remember thinking, I'd really like to have your job and trying to work out how I would be able to get into a role like that as well. So I think just having exposure into a different type of company was super helpful. And also just having, I think naturally when you change jobs, it's almost like start of school year feeling that you start evaluating exactly where you are. Yeah, and get my new pencils.
Yeah.
So then I was able, when opportunities started coming in within the company I was working at, I was able to put my hand up at them, and it just so aligned at the time that an opportunity came up in-house which I could go for as a medical copywriter and content creator.
So did they advertise for this opportunity?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So you put yourself forward for that, and how did it go as an internal opportunity?
It was really interesting in terms of, because I was predominantly in the clinical operations arm of the business before, so I was interviewed a few times by the creative team, which was really exciting in and of itself, because I was like, oh my gosh, am I a creative now? I'm speaking to the creative team. And I was also asked to do a test task from memory as well, which again was really interesting because as a medic, I'd done, I hadn't really interviewed before. There is such a need for doctors. You just get used to, you do, for example, like a situational judgment test, and you rank deaneries and things like that, that I hadn't actually had that experience of interviewing before and presenting strategies. So that was actually a really good opportunity to try and flex those skills.
How did you prepare?
Initially I panicked. How do I do an interview? Which is a key part of any preparation. Then I actually spoke to friends who worked in the creative field. So I actually veered away from speaking to medic friends who hadn't necessarily been through similar patterns before. I was really pleased with the piece of work I'd produced in terms of for the strategy presentation. So I'd practiced that loads and loads and felt really slick with that, and that really helped my confidence in the interview, I think, because I felt like, oh, I'm really excited by this piece of work, and then that made me feel more comfortable as a touchstone as well.
Awesome. And was it just the one interview you had to go through to get the job, or
stage interview process? Yeah. So what were the two stages? It was meeting two arms of the team. So I met the the creative director initially and one of the other copywriters, and then I moved over and had a chat to the CRM team as well, because clinical content is a lot more than, the blogs or the patient information you see. It can touch every part of a health tech company and beyond. So things like speaking to the CRM, so the email marketing team
What's CRM?
You're testing me now. It's basically the email marketing team.
So customer relationship management. So usually when people refer to CRM, that's what they're referring to, and usually it's the software, but sometimes you do have a team behind the software too. But that is, as you know, crucial to all parts of the business.
Absolutely, and it's amazing how, through working with that team, you see the virtue of things like really strong email marketing, really good push notifications, all these little parts of content which you may not necessarily think is content before you start doing the role.
Interesting. So, I mean, you obviously had you met the creative director, you met the CRM team. Did you ever get any feedback as to why they chose
They
you?
said they liked how enthusiastic I was. Exhibit A, overexcitable puppy.
Okay.
And they felt that it aligned with what they wanted from the role, because they wanted someone who was clinical, so in a doctor's position, but who also enjoyed the content part of it. And as you mentioned at the start of this call, I think at the time there weren't necessarily that many doctors interested in content. That has changed hugely, I would say, over the last year or so, which is going to make my life much more competitive. But
yeah, I mean, like literally, like when did I see it? It was like literally like 6-7 months ago, and in that time, I'm not saying I've seen. Well, yeah, because like content creation is like blown up, absolutely blown up as a thing that people have been doing since the beginning of time. I have to say, it's not something that's new, but it's just the way it's positioned as a career that can be monetized effectively and recognized and valued, especially by young emerging companies, particularly like in tech, is just actually phenomenal. The number of medical students and doctors who are now all clinical or content writers or content creators, it's phenomenal,
amazing.
actually.
Absolutely,
in a really
and it's super
exciting
exciting because I saw some great content only a couple of days ago from Dr. Liz O'Riordan, who's a surgeon and breast cancer survivor, and she was myth busting of the progesterone-only pill and breast cancer headline, which has hit the news in the last couple of weeks. And she was just top notch with her delivery. She was so no nonsense, great evidence base, and I did think, gosh, this like amazing amount of creators who are coming up, it's just going to make us all better at our jobs, which is pretty exciting.
No, absolutely. So I mean, like we've touched upon it, but there's also the bit about, I mean, now you're working at Dermatica and I mean, you've been there for a couple of months now as a clinical content lead. Congratulations, by the way. And you're doing that alongside some other GP work. So for like, what advice would you give for doctors who are looking to again continue their clinical work, but also looking to develop themselves in a industry, corporate, health tech setting, but actually finding clients, finding companies that will work with them or will offer them jobs or opportunities, whether it's employed or self-employed? So what recommendations would you give to them?
My main two recommendations are just, number one, get really clear on what you want to do and what you're offering to a company, because it's not enough to now just be a doctor who wants to get out of full-time doctoring. You need to be absolutely clear on what you want to do. And I appreciate that when you're at a space of overload and you're fed up of full-time clinical medicine, sometimes any route out feels better, but it really helps getting that clarity. And it means you're in a better position to sell yourself because you know what you are selling as well. So I think that is super helpful. And the next thing is LinkedIn. LinkedIn has completely changed my career trajectory over the last couple of years. I used to be quite dubious about it and think like I didn't really get the point of LinkedIn, and it's just been such a helpful platform for me in terms of network building, finding a mentor, building a community. We met through LinkedIn, and then actually it's also a really good exercise in building a personal brand, which is something as medics we generally have had no experience of. I think the younger generation of medics are already much stronger at it, but it was a really good space for me to develop a sense of actually who I wanted to be career-wise, and actually almost inadvertently build this brand, which has led to, people like you asking me to go on a podcast. So it's been really worth it for me.
Tell me, Catherine, what is this brand? What is Catherine Hyatt? What are they buying into?
Oh no, I'm being tested.
You should pick the top of your tongue, girl.
That's a key with being a wordsmith, isn't it? So, for me, it's all about I'm a clinical content specialist. And I remember actually listening to one of your podcasts a few months ago, and you said, be able to say in one sentence who you are and what you're doing, because then you can delve into the details. So I'm a GP and clinical content specialist, and my personal brand is I just love content, and you can get that sense through my posts. I think that I get really excited about it.
Enthusiastic, overexcited puppy.
That is the brand. And I'm enjoying, it's so nice to really enjoy my work as well, which I wasn't feeling when I was in clinical medicine.
Yeah, I mean, when we touched base last time, I think one of the things that really stood out for me at that time compared to now, I was like, that time, like your website was spoke what you did, in the sense that, being a clinical content expert, your copywriting was excellent, and copywriting is key now, and will increasingly become even more so. And I just loved how clean your website was, and very simple but very specific, and you position yourself quite well. And then since then, I followed you again online and LinkedIn, and you just look like you're having a lot of fun. You're having a great amount of fun, and you're doing some really cool stuff and some really impactful things. And I'm just so pleased for you, so pleased for you as to how you've been developing your career. But just going back to what you said about, one of the things, like, because we recently launched our Doctors in Industry incubator to help doctors move to industry faster. And one thing that's really standing out, not only from the doctors on the incubator, but the ones that have applied, is that clarity is like the biggest issue that doctors face, that's holding them back from getting the opportunities that they want, particularly because they just want to try and do, I was having an email conversation with another doctor recently who was literally, I'm going to do like radiology, I'm going to do aesthetics, I'm going to be doing psychiatry, I'm going to be, and it's like, okay, great. Number one, burnout. Number two, burnout. And number three, like, how can you really do something well and move in a direction when you're literally spread everywhere? And don't get me wrong, I've 100% been there for a long time. I am not saying I'm the perfect poster child for this at all. I've made every single mistake every doctor could have thought of in really kind of shaping my career to what it is today. So it's as a result of making a billion mistakes and learning from it being key. But it's easy to see why doctors struggle. And now it's increasingly important, as you've said, to why you really have to be specific about how you, clarity on who you are and what you're for, and then position yourself to the right people. And then realizing there's still a lot of hard grafting involved.
Absolutely.
It's not easy, but you will get there if you're persistent, but also if you're focused.
It's important to remember that everything makes sense in retrospect. So I'm sitting here as, a clinical content lead, loving my role, and having worked for a few years to get here. But if you'd asked me when I first reached out to Rena with that email, what will you be doing in a few years' time, I would have had no idea. So I think it's easy to get demoralized because, as medics, we're used to being high achievers, wanting to get things quickly as well. But actually time can be a great diagnostic factor, time can be great at just carving your path and making sure you're going in the right direction. And LinkedIn, like with lots of social media, is a highlights reel. So it may seem that everyone around you is doing the dream thing, but I suspect they're just probably telling you about the dream aspects of it rather than the whole story.
I think that's a really, really wonderful place to end it on. And I want to thank you so much for your time, for coming on this podcast, for your insights, for getting into some of the detail. And if anyone wants to reach out to you, how
LinkedIn.
can they best do
I'm
that?
not sponsored by LinkedIn, I promise. But yeah, just look me up. I'm Dr. Catherine Hyatt on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Catherine. And I'm sure that we'll be speaking again at some point soon.
Cheers, Abeyna.